This is Rachel Harris, 22. She was working as a jailhouse worker in Phoenix, Arizona, when inmate Bobby Ruiz, as you can tell right here, attacked her and, as you guys can see, bit off half of her ear. He actually swallowed it because they couldn't find it. He ambushed her as she was doing a routine cell check. He pinned her to the ground and he actually grabbed her in a chokehold. And then, as I already mentioned to you guys, bit off half of her ear. Luckily for Rachel Harris, there was 2 inmates that were nearby and they heard her painful screaming. And they rushed in and they pulled him off and they were able to restrain him until additional officers could come to her aid and properly apprehend inmate Bobby Ruiz. Now, the question arises, why was she doing this cell search alone? Usually in these routines, it's 2 to 3 officers doing these cell searches. And I think 2 theories. The first one could be that, well, maybe the prison was, there weren't enough employees that day or not enough guards on the floor. The fact, actually, is that there was just too many prisoners and not enough guards. The attack on an officer, or attacks on officers by inmates, are actually pretty common. And this example clearly reveals the potential dangers of prison overcrowding. As of 2014, there are 2.3 million incarcerated Americans in today's prisons, compared to the 1972 statistic of 300,000, which is moderately low. In California alone, there are 33 California Department of Correctional and Rehabilitation Centers, or CDCR prisons for short. Of these 33 prisons, 29 of them are way beyond capacity. And the rest, 4 of them, have reached their point of maximum capacity. You may ask yourself, what's the reason for, from 1972 to 2014, the total increase and spike of these numbers? Well, in 1971, President Richard Nixon declared a war on drugs, and as a consequence of that, 48% of the inmates in America are inside due to narcotic violations. So we have people that have been in possession or distribution of heroin or methamphetamine, with people that have kidnapped and arsoned and raped and things like that. And I don't think that, those crimes, I think that raping someone or kidnapping someone is a lot worse than just being caught for weed, in some cases. Another event which happened in 1984, the SRA, Sentencing Reform Act, that really spiked things up. This got things going, but this really just exploded. And as a consequence, they made new rules to elongate some prison times and punish crimes more severely. And as a result, we see this graph only goes up to 2008, but it continued to 2014, as I mentioned before on the last slide. The number is now more than 2.3 million people. There is a federal document written and evaluated by Arnold Schwarzenegger concerning the overpopulation of California's prisons. In the document, he expresses that the CDCR is required to house more than 15,000 inmates in conditions that pose substantial safety risks, namely prison areas never designed or intended for inmate housing. These include common areas such as a prison gymnasium, day rooms, and program rooms. So obviously, I don't think anyone would want someone like Bobby Ruiz, who actually was admitted into prison for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. I don't think you would want to sit with him at a cafeteria table with no protection whatsoever. These sort of places are definitely not ideal for criminals as violent as them. Many of these criminals are prone to violence, and entering a facility where there is an abundance of their own prisoners, I guess, they just live in constant fear of being assaulted or stressed. The stress that these prisoners go through is monumental, it's huge, and it's very hard for us to imagine how much it is because we're probably not going to touch prison floor anytime soon or ever. However, the risks of prison overcrowding do not stop inside the prisons. This is John Clements, and he was actually assassinated in 2013. His assassin was Evan Ebel, who shot this public official in his Colorado home right there. Evan Ebel was in solitary confinement or administrative segregation, as they like to call it, for most of his prison time. And he was admitted already mentally ill, and his solitary confinement just worsened that condition. When he came out, he had illogical views and ideas of this innocent man that he was responsible for his torture. And it's ironic because he's actually, or was, a fierce supporter of constitutional prisoner rights, and he fought for prisoners like Evan Epple to have less time in solitary confinement. Nevertheless, he was killed as a consequence of one man's frustration. Justice Anthony Kennedy made great emphasis on how the prisoners that were mentally ill did not receive the care they needed due to overpopulated prisons. His comment was a consequence of the 5-4 decision that was concluded in May of 2011 to officially declare overcrowding unconstitutional. Cases from prior decades were reevaluated from 1990 to 2001, and were also highly descriptive of instances where prisoners, mentally ill prisoners, were put in observatories, and they actually still managed to hang themselves. For those of you who don't know, observatories are little rooms where they put people that are in prisons, where they put prisoners that are inclined to take their own life, and so they can observe them. However, they still managed to die. And the reason for that is because the rooms are so small and it's so dark and it's just depressing to stay in there for a long time that these people who are already mentally ill grow even more mentally ill, and in some cases that Justice Anthony Kennedy himself described, they smeared feces on the windows, and here, let me show you guys a picture of, that's an example of one of the rooms with no windows. And as a consequence, the guards were unable to see what's inside the room, and they were able to hang themselves. Justice Anthony Kennedy stated that as a consequence of their own actions, prisoners may be deprived of rights that are fundamental to liberty. The Federal Bureau of Prisons reports an increased use of double bunking, waiting lists for education and drug treatments, a limit of work opportunities, and an increase of inmate to staff ratio. Obviously, there's a lot more problems. These problems that I just listed, I did not discuss. And there's a lot more that relate directly to prison overcrowding. However, because of our lack of time, it's impossible to discuss all of them. But I think that most Americans would agree that America needs to do something about the prison overcrowding and the problems that not only does it affect inside, but also on the outside, and to everyone involved. So, yeah.
Thank you. Jocelyn, what did you think?
I think you did a really good job, honestly. I liked that you used the story of that woman guard to kind of get the attention towards us, but you didn't really give us a thesis. Like, I didn't really grasp where you gave that to us until the end when you were kind of summarizing everything together. That's kind of like where you made up for it, but other than that, like, it was really good. You had good stats. You had good charts, which you referred back to after you gave us information, which was really good. It was good how you showed us the different effects and risk of overpopulation of prisons, and the reasons behind it. You know, you showed us a chart of the drug war, war on drugs and all that stuff. So you knew what you were talking about. You had really good visuals. You always referred back to them after your info, and you spoke really smooth. You knew what you were talking about, and yeah, that's pretty much what I got.
Yeah, Jose, I like the attention device. Also, I thought the story was well told and it set up the subject matter pretty clearly. So we know what the topic is. I'm going to agree with Jocelyn. I think that the thesis could be a little bit sharper. I didn't really hear a preview, and so the structure of the material is not as as strong as it should be. I do think, though, that you did a good job providing us with a variety of information, and sometimes I think it might have been a good idea to focus a little bit more on one of the particular problems instead of, I know there's a relationship between overcrowding and the negligence of the mentally ill in prison systems, but it felt a little bit like we got a side trip on whether or not imprisoning people for drug issues is appropriate, and then we're back to the issue about whether or not we have enough time or energy for the people who have some mental illness that's going on. I think I would have focused on the mental illness issue more and the way it relates into the prisons, and then maybe made the numbers game part of that process instead of doing the other kind of the reverse of that. You're doing the numbers game and the issue about how it's overcrowding, and then the mental illness thing is one of the things that we suffer from as a result of that. And so it kind of switches the focus of your speech as a consequence. If you stuck with the overcrowding and made the mental illness thing a secondary issue, that would be fine. Or if you made mental illness the main issue and the overcrowding is a part of that process, that would be fine. But it really feels almost like it's bifurcated into two issues here in the speech. And as a result, I felt a little bit less like it was as developed as it could be. The supporting material on the visuals, the first ones, I think, that's where you do the citation. It's right there on the visuals that we're seeing where that information came from on the graphs that you have. That's fine. And then later on we got the quotes from Schwarzenegger and Anthony Kennedy, so I think you give us some citations on that material. I thought that was very good. The transitions, like I said, between the points need to be stronger. Part of that's the organization that you didn't quite set up at the beginning. I know that you've got a structure in your mind and on the outline. You got to make it clear to the audience, though, and I thought that was a little bit problematic. The visuals, like I said, I thought that the graphs were fine. The pictures are often difficult to see because there's not enough contrast in the images. Even the picture of the guy who was killed, was by a psychotic inmate who got out ultimately. I can see the house, I can see the bodies, I can see, I don't know if they're bodies, I see sheets on the ground around there. I assume that they're bodies or something that's going on there. I could barely see the outline of the guy who was killed. It's just dark. It's a dark image. And the same sort of thing later on when you have the prison cell that you're showing us, the observatory kind of cell. Now I know part of it is that it's supposedly dark in there and that sort of thing, but you want us to get a sense of scale and size, and showing us this dungeon-like existence thing doesn't give us that much accountability on those other factors. You could maybe show that second picture, the picture that you do have is, here's what it looks like if you've got a bright light on, but here's what it looks like when the inmates are in there and you can't see anything. Then it would make a little bit more sense. You do a very good job speaking to the audience. If I'm just listening to you, I think everything goes really smoothly. As I'm watching you, you do stand sideways while you're giving the speech. You have a tendency, because the screen is over there to your right, to kind of face that direction and not engage the audience as completely as you might. Stuff we'll worry about more in the future, but I noticed it, and you'll notice it when you watch your speech. Okay, thank you.